The Writer's Cabin by Omar Cuellar. In the summer of 1984, I decided to seclude myself in a cabin deep in the woods of Townsend, Vermont, a place where the only sounds breaking the silence were the whisper of wind through the trees and the songs of birds. I had planned to spend 3 months cut off from society, seeking solitude as an ally so I could immerse myself fully in my writing. As a writer, my goal was to use that stillness to bring to life the stories boiling inside my mind, alternating between writing and reading the works of Howard Phillips Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith. Their tales, filled with cosmic horror and impossible worlds, resonated in my soul, feeding my imagination and guiding my pen. The cabin, rustic yet cozy, became my sanctuary, a space where time itself seemed to stand still. Each day began with the scent of freshly brewed coffee as sunlight filtered timidly through the windows. I would write for hours at a wooden desk facing the forest. When I wasn't writing, I read Lovecraft's descriptions of primordial entities or Smith's decadent, poetic worlds. My routine was simple but deeply satisfying. Write, read, cook, clean. I kept the cabin spotless, sweeping dust, washing dishes, making sure everything was in its place. Silence was my constant companion, and I never felt lonely. There was something comforting in the simplicity of that life. After 3 months of this rhythm, I began to feel the weight of fatigue. Keeping the cabin immaculate, though not difficult, started to feel like a burden. I decided to take a break from housework. I stopped sweeping, washing dishes, and tidying up. I assumed dust would gather, dirty plates would pile up in the sink, and disorder would take over. Yet, to my astonishment, the cabin remained pristine. Days passed and there was no trace of dirt. Surfaces gleamed as if someone had polished them, dishes were clean and put away, and not a speck of dust marred the floor. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the perfection was undeniable. As days turned into weeks, the supernatural cleanliness of the cabin began to unsettle me. How could a lived-in place, where I cooked, wrote, and existed, remain in a state of absolute perfection? I started to question the reality of my situation. Everything felt too perfect, almost unreal. I wondered whether prolonged isolation was affecting my mind, whether I was dreaming or trapped in some kind of illusion. The quiet, once comforting, now felt oppressive, as though the forest itself were watching me, waiting for something. I resolved not to give in to fear and kept writing, but doubt lingered. Soon afterward, another strange phenomenon appeared. The food supplies I had carefully calculated to last 3 months never ran out. Every time I opened the refrigerator or pantry, the shelves were full of fresh bread, fruit, vegetables, meat, everything replenished as if someone had restocked them overnight. I hadn't been to Townsend Village in weeks, yet I never lacked for anything. This discovery filled me with a mixture of wonder and dread. Who or what was behind this? The cabin seemed alive, caring for me, ensuring I had nothing to worry about except writing and reading. Unable to ignore these events, I began to reflect deeply on what was happening. The idea that my reality wasn't what it seemed grew stronger. One night, while rereading a Lovecraft story, a disturbing possibility occurred to me. What if all of this was part of a story I myself had written? What if, without realizing it, I was living inside one of my own creations, a tale I had forgotten over time? The thought seemed insane, but I couldn't dismiss it. I decided to go through the manuscripts I had brought with me, searching for any clue, any story that mirrored what I was experiencing. After hours of searching through my papers, I found a manuscript titled The Writer's Cabin. My heart pounded as I began to read. The opening lines described my exact situation: a writer retreating to a cabin in the Vermont woods to write, surrounded by silence and solitude. As I read on, astonishment turned to terror. The story recounted how the cabin stayed clean without the protagonist's help, how provisions never depleted, and how, gradually, the writer began to suspect something deeper was at play. It was my life, captured in words I had written myself. The tale explained that the cabin possessed a kind of life of its own, an invisible force that kept everything in order and provided whatever the writer needed so he could focus solely on his work. Yet it offered no clear explanation for the origin of that force. The story ended with the protagonist confronting a mysterious intruder, a tall, thin man dressed in black who seemed to know more than he let on. I shuddered as I read those words, sensing I was about to meet that very intruder. The line between fiction and my reality was blurring, and fear gripped me. That night, I pretended to sleep. I lay in bed with a kitchen knife hidden under my pillow, ready to face whoever or whatever was responsible for the cabin's mysteries. The silence was absolute until I heard a creak in the living room. My heart raced. Clutching the knife, I rose quietly and moved toward the darkness. There he stood, a tall, thin man wearing black trousers, a black shirt, and a long black hat that partially hid his face. His eyes glinted in the dim light, and his presence was as disturbing as I had described. "What are you doing with that knife?" he asked in a cold, calm voice, as if he already knew what would happen. "Did you think I wouldn't know you were going to attack me?" "Of course I know. It's all written." His words chilled my blood. With a lump in my throat, I ordered him to leave my cabin and never return. "I know it's you," I said. "You're the one who comes in every night while I sleep, cleaning the cabin and restocking my fridge and pantry. But I don't understand why. In my story, the reason is never explained." The man in the hat paused before answering. "In the story," he said, "the reason isn't spelled out because the reader is supposed to figure out the truth for themselves. But if you, the writer, can't reach the truth, then readers have even less chance. Allow me to explain the ending." His voice was deep, almost hypnotic. I stood frozen, the knife trembling in my hand. "Tommy," he continued, "where are we?" "In the cabin," I replied, confused by the question. "Yes, but where is the cabin?" he pressed. "In Townsend," I answered, thinking it obvious. He smiled again. "And what does that tell you?" In that moment, something clicked in my mind. Townsend, Vermont. The forests of Vermont. Suddenly, the Lovecraft stories I had been reading took on new meaning. I remembered the Migo, the alien fungi from Yuggoth that dwelt in the darkest corners of Vermont's woods, beings of superior intelligence who manipulated reality for their own purposes. My heart lurched as the truth hit me. The man in the hat was not human. He was an agent of the Migo, sent to watch over me and assist during my retreat. The Migo, as Lovecraft wrote, collected knowledge. They observed humans and sometimes used them. In my case, they wanted my stories. That was why the cabin never grew dirty, why the food never ran out. Everything was arranged so I could focus exclusively on writing, so I would produce more tales for them to harvest. The man in the hat was their emissary, ensuring nothing distracted me from my task. I stood in silence, processing the revelation. The knife slipped from my hand, and I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by what I now understood. The man in the hat no longer seemed threatening, but his presence reminded me I was not in control. "You have nothing to fear," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "The Migo mean you no harm. They only want what you create. Your stories are valuable to them, and I am here to make sure you can keep writing." His tone was almost kind, yet a chill ran through me. From that night onward, life in the cabin changed. I accepted the presence of the man in the hat, though I never saw him clearly again. Every night as I slept, I knew he, or something else, was there, keeping the cabin immaculate, refilling my supplies. I continued writing, but now with a new awareness. My stories were no longer just mine. They belonged to beings beyond my comprehension. The writer's cabin was no longer merely my refuge. It was a place where reality and fiction intertwined, where the Migo and I shared a silent pact. And so I kept writing, knowing my words traveled to places I could never imagine.